Steve Jobs, the iconic CEO of Apple, resigned Wednesday. In a personal letter to employees, Jobs said, as promised, if the day ever came when he could not meet his duties or expectations as CEO, he would step down. He says in the letter, unfortunately, that day has come. Here's a look back at this business icon's career.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is. No. Actually, here it is, but we're going to leave it there for now.
Steve Jobs, a college dropout, launched his career in 1976 in his parents' garage, along with Steve Wozniak. The two built the first line of Apple computers, including the Macintosh.
People think that, for instance, that IBM invented the personal computer. I saw this written just the other day, and it's ludicrous. IBM didn't enter the market till 4 years after Apple. In fact, Apple ran a front-page ad in its usual snarkiness saying, "Welcome, IBM." So he brought out a computer that had a mouse, that didn't have command lines, that had icons and drop-down menus, that we actually think of nothing of today, but it was ridiculed, it was laughed at. Now every computer runs that way, every computer.
When he basically invented the first super usable computer, there were computers, but he brought it to the mass mainstream with his user interface that was all the little icons that we take for granted today. And then he's continued to reinvent the industry time after time.
I want to go back to 1991 when Apple announced and shipped its first PowerBooks. This was the first modern laptop computer. Apple actually invented the modern laptop computer with these PowerBooks. It was the first laptop that had a TFT screen, the first modern LCD screens. It was the first laptop that pushed the keyboard up, creating palm rests, and had an integrated pointing device, in this case a trackball.
Their company, Apple, went public in 1980.
Steve played the part, from the long hair to the brash attitude. He was even brasher as a youngster than he is today. That he played that role perfectly as somebody who was going to come in and shake things up.
Then he was exiled. And he was exiled because he wasn't a very good businessman.
The board ousted Jobs, leading to what he called one of his most creative periods.
When Steve Jobs left Apple, he went to found this company called Next, which I think was a continuation of his original vision at Apple, which was to develop a computer that was, intuitive, easy to use.
He bought a little movie studio from George Lucas for, I think the number is $10 million called Pixar. It was a computerized animation thing that I imagine Lucas didn't think was going anywhere. He wouldn't have sold it. And, it eventually became one of the most successful, if not the most successful studios in Hollywood. And he sold it years later for, I think, $7 billion or something to Disney.
When Next was bought by Apple, he quickly found himself, once again, the face of Apple.
I think some would argue now is really a Next takeover of Apple, because in short order, Steve pretty much pulled a coup.
He came back to a company that was really kind of foundering, was running low on cash, products weren't selling as well. He had to make a lot of painful decisions.
Soon after his return, Jobs shocked Apple fans with a blockbuster announcement at Macworld Boston.
People were lined up around the block to get in Boston. And when he took the stage, it's like a rock star. It was really just like a rock star. It was like John Lennon taking the stage. It was amazing. And he told me at the time, be sure to come to this keynote because I'm going to have some really big news. And I tried to get the news out of him before the keynote. He wouldn't budge. And the big news was he had made peace with Microsoft. And there was actually, he had a big screen image of Bill Gates, and it looked kind of like Big Brother, like the famous 1984 commercial with the Mac. But here is Gates, from a satellite link up from Seattle, saying, what he was going to basically support Jobs. He was going to support Apple in its time of crisis.
Back in those days, once Microsoft really came on the scene in the early 80s, it really became, Gates and Jobs, Jobs and Gates. They personified the new tech. The coming together of them was a significant moment in technology.
And one of the big things that Gates did was commit to Microsoft Office. That was crucial for the Mac, and he committed to continuing that. And a lot of other applications had deserted Macintosh because the market share was so small. So Gates really came through at a time when they needed it.
Back in the lead, Jobs quickly launched Apple into its most successful period, moving the company beyond the PC into a mobile hardware and software juggernaut. His first big hit was the iPod, a music player the size of a deck of cards that could hold 1,000 songs. The company introduced iTunes as an affordable way to buy and manage music.
Steve Jobs is blamed sometimes through the iPod for ruining the music industry, but I think the real truth of the matter is he saved the music industry. So they were dealing with Napster and this huge amount of piracy of music, and he created a legitimate channel to sell music at a reasonable price, and he came up with a fairly innovative way to make sure it wasn't pirated without incredible draconian controls. He found this middle path. And so I think in the fullness of time, the music industry will say that actually he helped lead them out of the wilderness.
5 years later came the iPhone.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it?
And then, in 2010, he introduced the iPad.
We want to kick off 2010 by introducing a truly magical and revolutionary product today. And we call it the iPad.
While continuing to take market share in the computer market as others saw theirs slow, Apple also built itself into one of the most successful mobile software makers with its popular iOS.
Steve Jobs was one of the rare executives who managed to master both hardware and software, and I can't think of another who's done that.
By the end of 2010, Apple had sold 160 million iOS devices and facilitated the rise of the mobile app market, now boasting over 425,000 apps in its App Store and 15 billion downloads.
These are post-PC devices that need to be even easier to use than a PC, that need to be even more intuitive than a PC, and where the software and the hardware and the applications need to intertwine in an even more seamless way.
But there was a sadder side to all of Steve Jobs' success: his health.
In 2004, I think it was the summer of 2004, Apple drops a bombshell on everyone, basically, announcing that Steve had this rare form of pancreatic cancer that's slow-growing, not as lethal as the pancreatic cancer you would think of, but that he'd had surgery for it, and it was after the fact, and there was no warning, and people were pretty concerned about it. The shareholders were pretty concerned about it. And to boot, Steve didn't want to talk about his health issues. He thought it was a private issue. And then, of course, a couple of years ago, he started showing an extreme loss of weight that he wasn't really explaining for a long, long time. And then, of course, he took a second medical leave of absence. And then, of course, we broke the news that he had a liver transplant, really showing that it was serious and that shareholders were right to worry.
So I now have the liver of a mid-20s person who died in a car crash and was generous enough to donate their organs. And I wouldn't be here without such generosity.
In 2011, Jobs took a third medical leave, declining to give a timeline for his return, but making appearances, including dinner with President Obama and at the introduction of the iPad 2. Jobs and Apple's tight-lipped approach to telling investors about his health at times rattled Wall Street. Apple immediately named Tim Cook as CEO, Cook has been running the company since Steve Jobs took a medical leave at the beginning of this year. For the Wall Street Journal, I'm Stacey Delo.